Tennessee, 2001. A quiet Sunday afternoon unfolded like any other, until it didn't. 11-year-old Bethany Markowski, a bright and spunky elementary school student, stepped into the old Hickory Mall with her father and never walked out again. Within minutes, a normal day spiraled into panic as a child vanished without a single scream, struggle, or witness willing to speak. For years, investigators chased rumors, false sightings, and shadows stretching across state lines. Custody battles, conflicting stories, and dead-end leads clouded everything. And for nearly 2 decades, the truth stayed buried, until a forgotten witness finally broke their silence, revealing a secret that changed everything. Before we begin, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. March 4th, 2001. A Sunday. The kind of day that comes and goes without ceremony in Tennessee. The late winter sky hung over Jackson with a pale gray stillness, the air crisp but not cold. Across the state, people moved through quiet routines. Church, errands, small talk over gas station coffee. For one family, it would be the last morning anything felt ordinary. 11-year-old Bethany Markowski was up early. Her brown hair was brushed, her eyes wide and bright with the energy only children seem to carry. She had a call with her mother, Johnny Carter, from her father's phone that morning. Their voices exchanged warmth and familiarity, no different than countless conversations before. There was no fear in Bethany's tone, no sense that her day would end in the unknown. At the time, Bethany was spending the weekend with her father, Larry Markowski. It wasn't unusual, but behind the scenes, everything was fractured. Her parents were in the middle of a deeply bitter divorce. Custody battles, legal filings, a restraining order that had only recently been put into effect. Larry had allegedly attempted to take Bethany from her school just weeks before. The court had intervened. But now, he had visitation, and no one imagined what would happen next. That morning, Larry brought Bethany to visit family in Weakley County. Witnesses from that stop would later confirm she seemed happy, normal, and playful. She spoke about school, about her favorite songs, and the snacks she wanted from them all. There were no signs of hesitation or distress. To everyone watching, it was just another Sunday with a spirited, energetic girl whose life was filled with laughter and curiosity. Later that afternoon, Larry told investigators he and Bethany drove to the old Hickory Mall in Jackson. It was about an hour and a half away. Along the drive, Larry claimed they talked about clothes and a new CD Bethany liked. Small, forgettable moments, until they became part of a timeline that wouldn't hold together. When they arrived, according to Larry, Bethany asked if she could go inside alone. He said she wanted to browse for a bit while he stayed in the car to rest. He told authorities he was tired and needed a nap. Letting an 11-year-old wander a busy shopping mall alone raised eyebrows. Bethany, by all accounts, wasn't the kind of child to seek independence that way. Family and friends would later question whether she ever made that request at all. Still, Larry said he agreed. He reclined his seat, closed his eyes, and drifted off. 30 minutes later, he woke up. Bethany hadn't returned. He searched the parking lot, walked the entrance, checked the food court. Nothing. By 5:15 p.m., mall security had been notified. An hour later, Jackson police arrived. The search began in earnest. But from that moment on, no one, not a single confirmed witness, ever saw Bethany again. Where had she gone? Who had taken her? And why did the timeline feel off? Something wasn't adding up, and it wouldn't for years to come. The old Hickory Mall, Jackson, Tennessee. On March 4th, 2001, it was just another Sunday. The halls echoed with the hum of weekend shoppers, teenagers drifting in and out of stores, families pausing at food court tables, children tugging at parents' hands in front of window displays. It was a place designed for noise and movement. But somehow, in that sprawling bustle, an 11-year-old girl vanished without a sound. Larry Markowski approached mall security at 5:15 p.m. He told them his daughter had gone in alone about 30 minutes earlier and hadn't returned. At first, there was confusion. Maybe she was browsing a different wing. Maybe she was in a restroom. But within minutes, that optimism gave way to concern. Security guards swept the building. They checked every restroom stall, searched beneath changing room doors, peered into utility closets, and walked through service exits. Store managers were asked to scan the aisles. Announcements were quietly made through the mall's intercom system without alarming shoppers. But no one came forward. No clerk remembered seeing her. No customer recalled a child alone. It was as if Bethany had never entered the mall at all. By 6 p.m., the Jackson Police Department was on site. Officers expanded the search beyond the building, into the surrounding parking lots, side alleys, dumpsters, and wooded areas behind the mall. Police reviewed any available security camera footage, but in 2001, surveillance systems were limited, grainy, and far from comprehensive. The footage they did recover offered no usable images of Bethany entering or leaving. Meanwhile, Larry's story began to shift. First, he said Bethany asked to go in alone. Later, he implied she had simply stepped out before he could follow. When questioned further, he added that he might have dozed off for longer than he thought. Investigators grew uneasy. His version of events felt rehearsed in some parts, uncertain in others. There were gaps in the timeline, gaps that mattered. Why would a father allow his young daughter to walk alone into a crowded public space during a custody battle? Why did he nap in the car during his court-approved visit? And why was there no evidence, no trace, of her presence at the mall? By nightfall, the mall had emptied. Police stood in an atrium filled with silence, trying to piece together a puzzle with no starting edge. There were no signs of struggle, no dropped item, no witness who could place Bethany anywhere past the parking lot. But just as the trail in Jackson went cold, something stirred miles away. A report came in. Someone believed they saw a young girl matching Bethany's description in a town hours east of Jackson. She wasn't alone. She was with a woman no one recognized. An adult. Calm. In control. The mall had yielded nothing. But out in the hills and highways of Tennessee, something was moving. Who was this woman? Was she a stranger? Or was someone familiar hiding in plain sight? And was Bethany trying to escape or being taken? In the days after Bethany Markowski's disappearance, the story hit newspapers and local broadcasts across Tennessee. Her school photo, brown eyes, straight hair, a smile caught between childhood and adolescence, circulated through living rooms and gas station counters. People read the headline and thought, how does a child vanish in a crowded mall? But what came next was stranger. Tips started to roll in, sparse at first, then steady. A woman in southeastern Tennessee reported that a girl resembling Bethany had been brought to a local elementary school. The adult woman with her claimed to be the child's guardian and tried to enroll her under the name Danielle. The school secretary remembered the girl looking down during the entire interaction. When asked to sign a form, she flinched. Days later, in northern Tennessee, a small-town coffee shop logged 3 consecutive visits from a woman and a young girl. Same pair, 3 days in a row. The staff noticed something off. The woman would do all the ordering. The girl, who matched Bethany's physical description, never spoke. She kept her eyes on the ground. A barista later told police that the child looked like she didn't know how to behave like a kid. At first, these sightings were treated like hundreds of others in missing child cases, well-intentioned but unverifiable. But these had consistency. The same woman, the same girl, similar clothing, a particular pattern of behavior. The leads were forwarded to law enforcement. Detectives tried to backtrack locations, check credit card records, review school logs. But the woman had used cash, given no full name, and left no trail. Then came the bus station tip. An employee at a Greyhound depot remembered seeing a woman and child board a long-haul bus headed northbound. Destination, Moline, Illinois. The departure was unremarkable, but something about the child's demeanor stood out. She was quiet, not tired, nervous. The woman kept a firm hand on her shoulder the entire time. Other passengers recalled similar details. A child who didn't speak, and a woman who answered for both. Bethany's face was passed around to passengers who had been on that route. A few said yes. A few weren't sure. But by the time police traced the bus to Moline, it was too late. The bus had made multiple stops. Transfer points. People got off. Others got on. The pair had vanished into the folds of Highway America. No names had been taken. No IDs recorded. Surveillance footage at the terminal was either non-existent or erased. For all practical purposes, the trail ended somewhere between Tennessee and Illinois. No footprints, no goodbye. Still, something lingered. This wasn't a random abduction. The sightings pointed to an adult who had a plan, one that required silence, movement, and enough nerve to stay just ahead of detection. Investigators began to suspect this wasn't a stranger. Not someone operating in chaos, but someone operating with knowledge. Someone who knew Bethany. Theories bloomed. Was the woman connected to the custody battle? A distant relative? A hired third party? Or someone from the periphery of the family who had gone unnoticed? The image was haunting. A girl being moved through towns under a new name, taught not to speak, told to forget who she was. But the more chilling question remained. What adult in Bethany's orbit had the motive to disappear with her? And who had helped them stay hidden all these years? While police searched for Bethany in malls, on highways, and across bus terminals, another investigation was unfolding. One that didn't play out on public streets, but behind closed courtroom doors. Inside the Markowski household, things had been unraveling for months before Bethany vanished. Her parents, Johnny Carter and Larry Markowski, were locked in a bitter and increasingly hostile divorce. The kind where every court date added more tension, and every disagreement felt like a battlefield. The issue of custody was at the heart of it all. Both parents wanted Bethany, but their reasons and their methods raised concern. Just 2 months before Bethany disappeared, Johnny had filed for a restraining order against Larry. It wasn't a precaution, it was a necessity. According to court documents, Larry had tried to take Bethany directly from her school without permission. That incident rattled educators, police, and the judge presiding over their case. The order was granted. He was still allowed supervised visitation, but it was clear the trust had been broken. Despite this, Larry had Bethany for the weekend of March 4th. It was a legal handoff, but emotionally, the tension was boiling beneath the surface. When Bethany vanished, suspicion didn't have far to travel. Investigators immediately looked inward toward the family. Larry was the last confirmed person to see Bethany. His story was shaky. He said she went inside the mall alone. Then he said she may have already exited. Later, he adjusted the time of his so-called nap. No version felt fully solid. Meanwhile, Johnny's heartbreak unfolded under a microscope. She was terrified, both for her daughter and of what investigators might believe about her own role. She wasn't a suspect, but grief often draws questions. Her life was dissected by detectives looking for any motive, any overlooked relationship, any conversation that might suggest she had orchestrated something herself. But there was no evidence, no bank transactions, no unusual travel, no connection to anyone outside her immediate circle who could have played a part. Still, detectives knew this was no ordinary case of a stranger abduction. Bethany's disappearance felt orchestrated. Every clue, the sightings, the careful movement, the silence, hinted at intention. This wasn't chaos. This was control. So the question shifted. If Larry didn't take Bethany himself, could he have asked someone else to? That's where the mysterious woman from the sightings began to take center stage. The woman who enrolled Bethany in a school. The woman who shielded her in a coffee shop. The woman who guided her onto a Greyhound bus. She was calm, composed, a person operating with a script. Someone who knew what she was doing and why. But who was she? Detectives floated several theories. A former girlfriend? A relative? A family friend loyal to Larry? There were no fingerprints. No confirmed footage. No known associates who matched her description. She remained an enigma. As the weeks turned to months, the investigation lost momentum. Witness tips slowed. Media coverage waned. And the relationship between Johnny and Larry, already strained to the point of collapse, broke completely. Communication stopped. Accusations continued. Johnny, consumed by guilt and loss, remained vocal. Larry grew quiet. He lawyered up. He gave fewer interviews. And the shadow that followed him never left. But even as the emotional wounds deepened, something more damaging was happening behind the scenes. Case files began to gather dust. Personnel changed. Leads dried up. and Bethany's name slipped from headlines into cold case archives. What no one knew at the time was that a crucial thread had been missed, something buried in those early interviews, something that, if seen clearly, might have cracked the case wide open. But that thread wouldn't be pulled until 18 years later. By the fall of 2001, the urgency that once defined the search for Bethany Markowski had started to wane. Her photo was still pinned on community bulletin boards and taped to gas station windows, but the faces passing by had stopped looking twice. The girl with brown eyes and a bright smile had become another missing poster in a world already filled with them. Inside the Jackson Police Department, the reality was even more sobering. Dozens of leads had been followed. Dozens more had gone nowhere. Every tip had been recorded, investigated, and filed away. Each offered a sliver of hope that quickly dissolved under scrutiny. None had delivered proof. No personal items. No witness confirmation. No forensic evidence. Bethany's disappearance was starting to harden into something more permanent, something unsolved. Worse, the early promise of those initial sightings of Bethany with an unidentified woman had slowly eroded. As time passed, the memories of witnesses grew fuzzier. Descriptions conflicted. Timelines frayed. Law enforcement couldn't confirm if they were chasing real sightings or the echoes of fear. And the woman at the center of it all? She was a phantom. No name, no license plate, no financial record. She had paid in cash, moved without leaving a footprint, and spoken only when necessary. She lived in the system only as a sketch and a memory. The case remained open, but open in name only. Over the next few years, detectives rotated off the investigation. New cases arrived. Staff retired or transferred. Bethany's file thickened with paper and thinned with relevance. Eventually, it was boxed and shelved alongside other cold cases. Cases marked by grief, contradiction, and the one thing no investigator could overcome: time. For Johnny Carter, Bethany's mother, it was unbearable. Every birthday passed without a phone call. Every year brought another unopened Christmas gift. She remained publicly vocal, appearing in interviews and vigils, refusing to let her daughter become a statistic. But inside, the weight was crushing. The questions never stopped. Was Bethany still alive? Had she been taken by someone they knew? Was the woman from the bus station caring for her, or hiding her? Larry, on the other hand, faded into the background. He gave no news statements, offered no updates, and maintained his version of events. For many, that silence felt like distance, if not guilt. And then came the silence of the world. As media coverage dwindled and public attention turned elsewhere, Bethany's story receded into the shadows. People moved on. New headlines took her place. Her name was spoken less and less, until even that began to vanish. By 2010, the case was effectively dormant. But what no one could have predicted was that, nearly 2 decades later, a single decision, by someone who wasn't even part of the original investigation, would drag Bethany's name back into the light. A cold case detective, pulling files for review, would stumble across a witness statement buried in the earliest notes. Something that had been seen, but not fully understood. Something that, once seen clearly, would change everything. What had they missed? And who had been waiting all these years to finally speak? In early 2019, inside a quiet records room at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, a seasoned cold case detective pulled an old file from a shelf. The label was faded, the folder stuffed with yellowing notes, photocopied statements, and a cover sheet that simply read, Markowski, Bethany, March 2001. 18 years had passed since the 11-year-old vanished from the old Hickory Mall in Jackson. The case had gone quiet. But for this investigator, it was part of a larger project, systematically re-reviewing unresolved child disappearances from the early 2000s. Most files were dead ends, but Bethany's wasn't. The detective noticed it almost immediately. Not a dramatic piece of evidence, but a pattern. Sightings reported across Tennessee in the days after the disappearance. A woman, a child, repetition, movement. There was consistency, intent. And then there was something else, buried in the supplemental notes of a witness interview taken at the Greyhound station. A teenage boy had spoken to officers in 2001. His statement was brief, even dismissed at the time. He had been waiting for a bus home when he saw a woman and a girl board together. He noted the child looked scared, tense, and that the woman was watching everyone around them. His phrasing was careful but vivid. Something about the woman felt off, he said. Back then, investigators believed the account lacked specificity. No names, no contact, just impressions. And with dozens of unverified sightings coming in, his words were lost in the noise. But in 2019, the detective paused. There was something in the way the witness described the interaction, not just what he saw, but what he felt. The girl wasn't simply scared. She looked coached. The woman wasn't just protective. She looked prepared. That small thread, overlooked for nearly 2 decades, became the lever to open the case again. The priority shifted to finding that teenage witness, now an adult likely in his early 30s. His contact info was long outdated, but through DMV records and a few rounds of digital digging, the team tracked him down, living out of state, working a quiet job in construction. When contacted, the man hesitated. At first, he didn't want to talk, said he didn't remember much. But when the investigator mentioned the name Bethany Markowski, everything changed. They arranged a meeting at a local precinct. When he walked into the room, his face was tight, not from defiance, but from the weight of something carried too long. And when the old file was laid in front of him, he started to speak. He remembered the bus, the station, the smell of stale air and hot coffee. He remembered the woman's hand on the child's shoulder. But most of all, he remembered the girl's eyes. It was like she wanted to say something, he whispered, but didn't know if she could. The woman had used a different name when buying tickets. He remembered her spelling it out. He hadn't said anything then. He was just a teenager, alone, unsure of what he'd really seen. And in the chaos of police questioning, he doubted himself. But now, as an adult, he knew what he'd witnessed had mattered. That girl wasn't a stranger to that woman. They had a plan. They were running, not from the law, but from someone else. With that memory unlocked, the detective had something new, a name the woman used, a timeline, a starting point, and the key to unraveling a secret that had been hidden across state lines for nearly 20 years. But who was the woman behind the alias? And how close had she been to the family all along? The man's memory had opened a door, and what lay beyond it would change everything. With a new lead in hand, investigators dug into the alias the woman had used at the Greyhound station. It didn't match any known associate of Bethany's parents. But as detectives traced financial transactions tied to the name, one address kept appearing, a small boarding house near Moline, Illinois. It was modest, cash-operated, the kind of place people stayed when they didn't want to be found. When police combed through archived tenant records, they found a partial match, not to the alias, but to someone else. A woman whose real name had once appeared, years earlier, on the periphery of the Markowski family's history. She wasn't close. She wasn't immediate family. But she was connected, an extended relative by marriage, once a quiet presence in the background during family gatherings, now resurfacing with new weight. She had reason to sympathize. She had once confided in Larry about understanding what it meant to lose a child. That empathy, investigators now believed, had become action. And the action? A calculated decision to help remove Bethany from what she likely saw as an unstable home situation. Not a violent kidnapping, not a ransom plot, but a quiet relocation, done in secret and with a child too young to understand the permanence of what was happening. When investigators confronted the now-identified woman at her home in Iowa, she didn't run. She didn't argue. She asked to sit down. What followed was a story that had lived in silence for 18 years. She confirmed that she had taken Bethany, but insisted it was done to protect her. She described visiting Tennessee in early 2001 and hearing from Larry about the danger he believed Bethany was in. Whether that danger was real or manipulated no longer mattered. The woman had believed it. She claimed she was asked to watch over Bethany and keep her off the grid until custody was settled. But things escalated. Legal pressure mounted. The fear of being charged as an accomplice became overwhelming. So she vanished, taking Bethany with her, across state lines under a different name. She painted a picture of calm secrecy, of traveling late at night, paying in cash, switching motels, and finally settling in a quiet corner of Illinois where Bethany would be raised as her niece. The girl was told her mother had died, her father was gone, and that her new life was necessary for her own safety. Bethany grew up not knowing she was missing, not knowing there was a name, a birthday, and a mother who had never stopped looking. The woman didn't offer legal resistance. She gave names, dates, and locations, details that matched record from bus stations and financial ledgers. The story held, and the more she spoke, the clearer one truth became. This wasn't a calculated abduction for gain. It was an emotional act, born from fear and blurred loyalties. But that didn't absolve her, because for 18 years, a mother had grieved a daughter who was still alive. A girl had lived a borrowed identity, and a nation had searched for someone already found. Now, authorities faced one final question. Would Bethany remember the truth if she was ready to hear it? Her real name was Carol Jane Hensley, not a stranger, not a criminal in the traditional sense, but a woman who had hovered at the distant edge of the Markowski family, barely known, seldom remembered. A former in-law, once married into the broader family tree, she had drifted from Tennessee years earlier. But in early 2001, she returned quietly and unexpectedly. Her presence wasn't documented in court records. There was no paper trail. But her conversations with Larry Markowski had left a deeper imprint than anyone knew. Carol told investigators she hadn't planned to take Bethany at first. But after speaking with Larry, who painted a picture of legal injustice and a child in danger, she believed she was doing the right thing. She called it protecting. The courts would have called it kidnapping. Financial records, long buried in handwritten ledgers and dusty receipts, showed her movements. A motel in Crossville, Tennessee. A gas station charge in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Then the Greyhound tickets purchased under an alias, Sandra Lee Martin. The destination, Moline, Illinois. She guided detectives through each step. The bus route, the transfers, the final stop. From there, she said, she rented a room in a shared boarding house near the outskirts of Moline. Paid weekly in cash. Kept to herself. Introduced Bethany as her niece. And Bethany? She was renamed Danielle. Carol enrolled her in a local school under the new identity. Told neighbors that the girl's parents had died in a car accident in Georgia. Bethany, confused but trusting, accepted the story. She was too young to piece together the truth, and Carol had created a world with enough structure to feel real. There were birthdays, presents, vacations, but always with limits. No online photos, no family doctors, no friends allowed too close. For nearly 2 decades, Danielle lived in plain sight, never knowing she was the center of one of Tennessee's most haunting cold cases. Once Carol confessed and gave Bethany's exact location, authorities coordinated carefully with local law enforcement. No media, no sudden knocks on the door. The goal was sensitivity, not spectacle. Bethany, now 29 years old, was working part-time at a local boutique and living in a small apartment downtown. Investigators approached her with caution. They explained who they were, what they had discovered, and most importantly, who they believed she truly was. At first, she didn't believe them. Then came the photos, childhood pictures, birth records, her mother's name, her original birthday, memories that didn't match, gaps that suddenly made sense. DNA confirmation came weeks later. The match was undeniable. Bethany Markowski had been found. The reunion between Bethany and her biological mother was quiet, emotional, raw. There were no cameras, no press conference, just a private moment, 18 years delayed, between a mother who never stopped hoping and a daughter who'd lived her life as someone else. Carol was taken into custody, but later released on limited charges due to the statute of limitations and lack of clear legal precedent for such long-term concealment under claimed non-malicious intent. The focus had shifted from punishment to healing. But for Bethany, the healing would take time. She had grown up believing lies told out of fear. Now she had to reassemble an identity from fragments of someone she'd been told didn't exist. Who was she really now? The child taken, or the woman she became? And how do you live forward when your entire past was a fabrication? That was the final mystery Bethany had to face. Not in courtrooms or case files, but within herself. When DNA confirmed the truth, investigators stood before one of the rarest outcomes in modern missing child cases, a recovery not made through technology or forensic breakthroughs, but through memory, patience, and a single, long-silence confession. Bethany Markowski had been found, not in a basement, not in a remote cabin, but in a quiet Midwestern neighborhood, walking the same sidewalks as everyone else, living under a name that was never truly hers. She had become Danielle at age 11, and she had stayed Danielle for 18 years. The stories Carol Hensley had told her about her parents dying in a car accident, about how she'd been rescued, were her only truth. Until now. For Bethany, the revelation wasn't immediate. It came in waves. First disbelief, then denial, then a growing unease as photos and records filled in gaps she didn't know existed. There were birthdays she couldn't remember, people she never recalled meeting. She stared at pictures of herself, laughing at a birthday party in Tennessee, and realized she had no memory of the cake, the gifts, or the people around her. The investigators didn't push. They knew the process would be long. Bethany was offered counseling, emotional support, and time. She wasn't forced into a reunion or thrust into the spotlight. The goal was healing, not headlines. Over several months, Bethany agreed to meet her biological mother, Johnny Carter. It was not the tearful, made-for-TV moment people expect. It was quiet, careful. There were hugs, but also tears of grief for all the time lost. Years that should have been filled with school dances, late-night talks, and mother-daughter rituals gone. But even amid the pain, there was a sense of closure. Johnny had always believed Bethany was alive. Her instincts had never let her fully grieve. Now, after nearly 2 decades, she could hold her daughter again, not just in memory, but in reality. Bethany's legal identity was restored. Her birth certificate amended. Her original name reinstated. But identity on paper is only part of the journey. Emotionally, she was still living between 2 lives. Danielle, the girl she had been for nearly 20 years, and Bethany, the girl she once was but never remembered being. She found herself in the strange position of grieving a life she had lived, while also mourning one she never got to. Friends from her old life had grown up without her. Her father's memory was complicated, clouded by half-truths and a silence she couldn't yet unpack. And the woman who raised her, Carol, remained a confusing presence, someone who both loved her and lied to her. Bethany didn't rush to reclaim the past. She didn't move back to Tennessee or give interviews. Instead, she quietly began reconnecting with pieces of her old life, scrapbooks, school records, childhood photos mailed to her by relatives she didn't remember meeting. She was learning how to be Bethany again, or rather, how to merge who she was with who she had become. And in that delicate process, a question lingered like a whisper. When the world believes you're missing, but you've been living all along, how do you begin again? Bethany Markowski's disappearance haunted Tennessee for nearly 2 decades. It wasn't just the loss of a child. It was the echo of what might have been. A maze of uncertainty, conflicting narratives, and scattered sightings that never quite came together. Year after year, the same question remained. How does a young girl vanish in daylight and leave no trace? But in the end, the answer didn't come from advanced technology or new forensic tools. It came from memory, from a witness who, after carrying the weight of what he'd seen for 18 years, finally spoke up. From a woman whose guilt had quietly unraveled her silence. From a cold case investigator who refused to overlook the smallest detail in a dusty file. Bethany's case didn't close with courtroom drama or press conferences. It closed with a name returned, a history rewritten, and a life finally her own again. Though her childhood was altered by fear-driven choices, Bethany's adulthood became a space for clarity, healing, and control. She now chooses who she is, where she goes, and how her story continues. Her journey is a reminder that some mysteries are solved not by science, but by people, by persistence, and by the quiet strength it takes to face the past. Because even in the deepest silence, truth waits. If this case moved you, take a second to share your thoughts in the comments below. Every story deserves to be remembered,